Welcome to Finlos Reads. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were my first fandom, even before fandoms were what we know them to be today. In the 80s and early 90s, most kids were exposed to such things through hand-me-down toys from older siblings or by watching whatever shows were available on after-school broadcast TV. Cable was still a hot commodity, and there wasn't yet consumer-level internet. There were a few properties that were common knowledge. The Disney staple of programming based on older IPs, Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, and Tailspin, for example. Nintendo was just starting to break through, but video games were still fairly niche. Captain Planet made a splash, riding the recent wave of environmentalism amidst the hole in the ozone, acid rain, and huge oil spills. But none of these reached the marketing ubiquity of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Propelled by a hugely popular cartoon, the Turtles were everywhere. Clothing, action figures, lunchboxes, video games, Saturday morning cartoons, after-school cartoons, cereals, arcade machines, Halloween costumes. But many of the kids who loved the cowabunga-spouting mutant bros like me didn't realize that this empire of entertainment had humble beginnings in an independently published black and white comic book. Just a few years before the launch of the first animated series, creators Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird published the first issue of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with a very small print run. But with experience in the newspaper world, Laird had also sent a press packet including illustrations, story outlines, and script pitches to networks, radio stations, and publishers across the country. The demand for the second issue was massive. The pair were invited to their first large comic convention, and the Ninja Turtles as a pop culture entity was launched. Of course, much of this backstory was invisible to me as a kid who just wanted to watch cartoons and collect the toys. But in 1992, 8 years after the first publication, and 4 years after the beginning of the animated show, I was able to read the entire first run of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles comic books. By this point, the first and still best live-action film had been released, and I was well versed in Turtles mythos, at least what had been available via the show and movie. But the comics gave me my first experience of interpretive dissonance, where the things I had known to be did not match with a different presentation of the same things. At first glance, my assumption was that the comics were inspired by the show, not the other way around, and as such, my reaction was one of immediate negativity. But when I came to understand that the comics were the source material, I was intrigued by the stylistic differences. If you have never seen the original comics, the designs are drastically different from those adapted by the animators. Beyond being black and white, though they have reprinted color editions, the line work is heavy and blocky, and the turtles themselves are lumpy and gangly. But they are incredibly detailed, with gorgeous shadow work and atmospheric details. They have an intensity of motion and are much more action-oriented than the animated counterpart. And shockingly, without color, the turtles themselves lacked the trademark identity given by their headbands. This was my first experience with being a fan of a property with this many layers, each one, the film, the cartoon, the comic, offering its own take on the story and mythos, each with something to offer and provide depth to the creative well. All this to say that I love the Ninja Turtles. The action figures were the first things I collected and cared for. The album for the second film, the one with Vanilla Ice's Ninja Rap, was the first album I ever purchased. I was a Turtles fan before I was a Star Wars fan. That's how deep their roots run in my psyche. I stopped watching the films after the third because the quality fell, and I never followed any of the subsequent animated series after the original went off the air in 1996. In the intervening years, numerous comic runs, animated shows, and movies have come and gone, some with the original writers and artists' involvement, others without, but I never cared much because I had my story of the Turtles with Shredder, Krang, Bebop and Rocksteady, Splinter, Casey Jones, April O'Neil, and the boys themselves. They were safely secured in my brain, and none of the sprawling works that followed touched them. But a couple years ago, I was reading one of the nerd blogs I follow, and I saw a pre-release comic cover for something called The Last Ronin, with an illustration for what was obviously a mature Ninja Turtle. The brief outline that was given talked about the last surviving brother on a quest for revenge. Importantly, it had the involvement of the creators. It was set to be a 4-issue run that told a single tale in the Turtles' future. I was excited, but I was also shook by the idea of there being only a single remaining turtle. I felt as if 3 of my friends from childhood were suddenly dead in a very real way, but the identity of the lone turtle was kept secret. I followed the releases of the issues, but decided to wait until I could purchase them as a collected set in hardcover. Eva actually just got it for me during the holidays. It includes an introduction from film director Robert Rodriguez, which I didn't read, and a second intro from co-creator Kevin Eastman, explaining how this story is based on one they wrote together many years ago before they parted ways. This to me makes the story feel as if this is the future of my turtles, the ones from the comics that I read all those years ago, and who are closely related to that first show and first film. All of which share the common mythos of the Turtles and their Master Splinter's feud with the Foot Clan. This book has a few characters from newer stories who I had to look up, but it hews fairly close to the canon that I know. The title of the story explains its basic premise, a Ronin being a wandering samurai with no master. In this tale, our lone protagonist, nameless at first, enters the toxic waters surrounding a future Manhattan overrun with the Foot on a mission of revenge, and maybe redemption. All the while, he carries the weapons of his fallen brothers. Another interesting aspect is that samurai were warriors associated with honor and higher classes, while ninja were secretive, sometimes assassins, and associated with lower classes. This may be an attempt to imply that there is the potential for the Turtles, or this one turtle, to grow beyond their humble origins. The pacing of the first segment is breakneck, with panels flowing into one another. The art style is decidedly modern, with sharp lines, gorgeous color, and a fluid sense of motion. I found myself having to reread panels because my eyes flowed with the action faster than I could read the text bubbles. And while that didn't inhibit my understanding of the narrative, I wanted to absorb all the details. This is the story of a turtle at the peak of his training and knowledge, but moving with the determination that knowingly risks his own life. Indeed, he says as much to his brothers that this is a suicide mission. This is my favorite conceit of the book, that the lone turtle is holding a silent conversation with his lost family as he seeks to repay them their lives by taking that of the one who took theirs. The voices of the dead turtles are the emotional anchor within the entire work, and my reading slowed drastically when these exchanges took place. Before long, there are some surprise visits from old friends and new allies who are determined to aid the aged warrior on his mission, but these moments are intercut with backstory told in flashback. Some of these are exposition to explain the fates of the fallen brothers. My favorites are those of the protagonist's years in self-imposed exile, which were drawn and inked by Kevin Eastman in the style of the original comics. It was a treat for this throwback in style to ground the narrative in the roots of the overarching original conflicts. This story sheds the science fiction of the Krang's interdimensional invasions and some of the zanier elements found in the cartoon, and keeps things tightly focused on the personal mission of revenge and the restoration of honor. This is both a strength and weakness of the book. It has swift pacing with barely any time to breathe. The middle section features the forging of an intergenerational bond between the old guard and the new, before very quickly moving on to the end game. This is where some time could have been spent on fleshing out some nuance to the plot, maybe providing more context for how things in New York could have fallen so far, maybe allowing the surviving turtle more time to express grief that is so baked into a story like this. Those few moments of character we are given, though, are the heart of the book, again, mostly dealing with the family dynamic between the brothers. Even when dead, their voices speak as they would have in life, teasing, playing, pushing, and even hurting. This sibling interplay offered the best single moment of the entire story, causing me to wince with understanding and shared pain as our survivor longs for their company while wishing their echoing voices away so that he might avenge them. Ultimately, vengeance doesn't really make for much narrative satisfaction anymore, for us the reader, or even for the title Ronin. There is a sense of inevitability, of mundane certainty, that I didn't find that exciting. I instead reveled in the loneliness, the quiet, and the need to be angry at a world that seems to punish good people. I think this is what really called me to the story to begin with. I have aged with these characters, and the simplicity of mission that one has with youth no longer suffices in adulthood. The mission isn't enough, and a Ronin, a samurai without a master or a family as guide, with no community for whom the good is being done, is ultimately rudderless, reckless, and dangerous. This story explores those ideas, perhaps a little more superficially than I would have hoped, but those themes are present and I think worthy of deeper exploration. The ending of the story had less impact than I had expected. Instead, I found myself flipping back to the middle of each issue to reread the flashbacks and the ghostly dialogue. I guess, like this lone Ninja Turtle, I missed his brothers. Apparently, there are plans for more tales in this offshoot future of the Turtles universe. I may read them, but really, I think this book leaves me with enough closure to feel as if I understand the stories of the Turtles I know. For that I am thankful. And I also suddenly have the desire to rewatch some old cartoons.